Match continued. Came back to the dressing room, and I thought, oh man, well, I'm going to have a confrontation here. And it was exactly the other way. He came back and stopped right there in the dressing room and said, "Kid, this is what you did wrong," and had me pick him up in a body slam position in the dressing room now, where I could get a sense of how to control his balance and his weight. And he's here, and he says, "You don't have to do anything, but just it's a fulcrum. You just turn me, and gravity takes care of the rest." So of course, next night I'm the same guy, Pedro Gway again, and he slammed me, kid. And I thought, oh God, please don't. I'm praying that he wouldn't ask me to slam him again. Of course, slammed him. Everything went well. So, and I saw Pedro Gway years later, before he passed away. So I always had a fond spot in my heart for Pedro Gway because he was so understanding and so helpful to me. But Bruno ran the Pittsburgh territory, and he had bought it from, I don't know who owned it before, and it ran as a Friday, Saturday, Sunday night territory that was part of, Vince McMahon's operation. And they would do a big show once a month at the Civic Arena, and then they would run high schools, West Virginia, Western Pennsylvania, and Ohio, about a 100-mile radius. And I think it was 1969, 70. I got married right out of college. It didn't work out because, I thought, my dream to become a wrestler is gone up in smoke. I'm now 28 years old, and all of a sudden I was working for a trucking company. I taught school for a year. Nothing that, made me happy. So I ran into the Sheik again, and the trucking company that I was working with moved me to Detroit as part of the management training program. So I thought, okay, I'm going to let the company move me to Detroit. I'll call the Sheik. And when I called him, I remember him telling me, he said, right now is not a good time. My business is slow. I got a lot of guys that have families to feed. It's their full-time business that aren't working, and it would be hard for me to book you every night. And so he said, keep your job, and I'll use you as much as I can. So I was working, 1 or 2 nights a week, just picking up extra money, getting extra experience. And I learned a long time ago in the business that a lot of people knocked certain promoters or certain people, and the Sheik was one of them. That a lot of people had a lot of animosity, but for me, I can't say anything but good. He helped me get into the business. I got paid for every time I ever worked. Everything he said he was going to do for me, he did for me. So I have a very soft spot for Eddie Farhat because of what he did for me. But I went to Detroit, like I said, and Detroit was a heavy union town. And I was there like 3-4 months, working a couple of days a week. Got to work Cobo Hall on the big shows periodically, and did their TVs. They did TV up in Walled Lake, Michigan at that time with Bob Finnegan. And all of a sudden the trucking company said, well, it's not working here because there's too many union restrictions, and we're transferring you to Warren, Ohio, in the middle of nowhere. And so I thought, what am I going to do? And I remember Warren, Ohio, I think was about 90 miles from Pittsburgh. So I said, well, I knew Bruno from all those years, and Bruno had been really good to me as a referee. Bruno was, again, somebody else in the business that I have very, very great feelings about. And so I tried to call the office, and Ace Freeman and a guy named Rudy Miller ran the office at that time. And I guess Bruno owned it, and they worked for him. And Ace was still wrestling at that time. He was an old-time wrestler, and Rudy had been around as a promoter. So, of course, I called and tried to explain who I was. I used to referee. And, yeah, kid. So I finally sent a letter to Bruno. And I said, Bruno, Civic Arena is this Friday. I said, I'm going to come down and explain my situation. And I said, I've been working some for the Sheik. They moved me over to Warren, Ohio. And I said, I know you run the territory, and I don't want to knock somebody else out of work. But I said, if I could get some work, I want to break into the business. So I sent Bruno a letter, and I remember Friday night, Civic Arena, I got in my car, I drove down, go to the back gate, and asked for Ace Freeman. Ace, I talked to him for a while. Yeah, he was hard to hear, an old timer. And, kid, wait here. And I've been in the dressing room all those years as a referee with all of the stars from who's who, and of course nobody knows me here, and it's like, here, wait outside. And I thought, maybe it's different now with Bruno. I didn't know. So I remember I was there a couple of minutes, and all of a sudden Ace opens the door, with this kind of surprised look on his face. Hey, come here, kid. Go in the dressing room, goes back, and there's Bruno. Bruno got up and embraced me like I was his long lost son. And so good to see you. I got your letter, and I apologize. I had no way to get a hold of you, whatever. So he turns to Ace and he said, Ace, he says, I want him booked. And he said, I want him to start next Friday. And he said, if we run 3 nights, he said, I want you to book him at least 2 of the 3 nights. So I stayed there around Pittsburgh, and I worked 2 of the 3 nights. And Sammartino and the Sheik never got along all that well. But Bruno understood that I was just a guy working. And so during almost the year that I was there, about every other month I would call the Sheik and I'd say, Sheik, my parents lived in Detroit at the time. My father worked for General Motors. And I said, I'd like to come back and see my folks. I said, any chance I could work hobo and have my TV? Kid. So Bruno would book me Thursday, Friday, and then I would drive to Detroit, and the Sheik would use me. I'd work hobo hall, and then I'd pick up a couple shots of TV Sunday. So they were great, great times.
Well, when did you first start getting pushed in the territory?
Oh boy, I worked around Pittsburgh for that year, and that would have been 1970. And I met a guy from Springfield, Ohio, named Jim Grabmeyer. And Jim was a journeyman wrestler who would work 6 months around the winter around Ohio and Pittsburgh. And then in the summer months, he would traditionally go down to the Carolinas and work for Jim Crockett because their business was better during the warmer summer months. And I got to know Jim real well. I told him I want to break into the business. So he said, well, I'm getting ready to go down to Charlotte for the summer like I do every year. And I got a packet of publicity pictures. He says, I'll go down to Charlotte and put in a word for you. And he said, let's see what happens. So one thing led to another, and Jim Grabmeyer, I don't know who he talked to. George Becker was the booker then, and Jim Crockett Sr. was very hands-on running the business. And next thing I know, I got a call saying, hey, kid, I got you a starting date. Oh, God, I can't believe it. Yeah. And it was like April 4th of 1971, something like that. So, I've been working for this trucking company, and I remember I had no money. I was living in the basement of somebody's house, working this job. Like I said, my marriage had fallen apart, and picking up extra money wrestling, but I didn't have anything. Everything I owned was in the car. It was an old car. I'd never been below the state of Virginia in my life. So, packed everything in my car, and I remember on a Sunday night, I wrote a letter of resignation to the terminal manager of this trucking company there in Ohio, and I told him that I had an opportunity to follow my dream, because they knew I wrestled some around Pittsburgh because they'd be on TV, and I was kind of like, well, he works for us, and this is what he does on the side. So he knew that it was always kind of a dream, and I said, I finally got a chance to do it full time, to do what I've always wanted to do. And I was supposed to start in 2 weeks. I was going to give you 2 weeks notice, but the promoter called last night and something happened. If I'm not there Monday, I don't get the thing. So I said, I hope you'll understand and won't be mad. I was fearful if I gave the guy 2 weeks notice, he'd say, bye-bye. I have no job for 2 weeks. I have no money. So that was what I did. And I remember I slid the letter under his door, and Sunday afternoon got in the car, and I drove. I don't know if I drove all the way through or not. I think I want to say that I did. And Jim Grabmeyer used to stay at the YMCA in Charlotte. He said it was like $15 a night or something. So that's where I went. And I got there Monday morning, and the office, Crockett's office, it was 1111 East Moorhead Street, same street the Y was on, about 2 blocks away. And next morning, went down to the office, and I had no idea what to expect. And it was an old house, and that was their office. And Jim Crockett had an office with a big, huge desk, and he was a huge, huge man. He had to be 350 pounds. But a typical Southern gentleman. Everything was yes sir, no sir with everybody that was around him. And I went in there, and he was very nice to me, and this was like, wow, I've been up in the Northeast all those years, and now here I am in a totally unknown environment. Most of the wrestlers I didn't know. There was a couple guys, as I remember, and my first match was that night in Park Center in Charlotte against Gina.
Watch thousands of exclusive shoot interviews right now on TitleMatchNetwork.com.